For centuries, a community lived on the margins of society, far from the cities, far from power, and far from official history. They believed the world had become corrupted, and that only the faithful would endure a great transformation of the age. These men were known as the Essenes. They were guardians of sacred texts, strict rules, and a radical vision of spirituality. When their writings were uncovered in the 20th century, what seemed like a simple archaeological discovery became a revelation that challenged centuries of religious tradition, forever changing our understanding of Judaism, Christianity, and the final prophecies of the ancient world. Before we dive deeper into this fascinating story, show your support, like the video, share it with those interested in history and spirituality, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss documentaries like this one. To understand the Essenes, we must first understand the world in which they emerged. First century Judea was a territory under strong foreign domination by the Roman Empire. It's marked by religious tension, power struggles, and deep internal divisions. It was a pressure cooker of spiritual fervor and political rebellion. Competing for influence over the hearts and minds of the people were several prominent groups. The Pharisees emphasized strict adherence to both written and oral law, believing that righteousness could be found in daily life. The Sadducees, an elite class of priests connected to the temple in Jerusalem, rejected the idea of resurrection and held only to the written Torah. And then there were the Zealots, radical revolutionaries who believed that only violent uprising could free Judea from Roman rule. In this environment of ideological conflict and spiritual crisis, where the very soul of Judaism was at stake, some chose to withdraw entirely from the system. They saw corruption not just in the Roman occupiers, but within the holy city of Jerusalem itself. These were the Essenes. They formed a closed community, rigorously organized around discipline, silence, and spiritual purity. They rejected urban life, the accumulation of wealth, and what they saw as the compromised religious politics of Jerusalem. To them, the temple, the very heart of Jewish worship, had been desecrated by a corrupt priesthood. So, they created their own sanctuary in the wilderness. They believed that they, and they alone, preserved the true covenant with God, a covenant undefiled by worldly ambition. Their way of life was a radical protest, a declaration that true faith could only be found far from the centers of power, in a community dedicated to a higher, purer standard. This wasn't just a retreat. It was a mission to safeguard a sacred flame they believed was extinguished everywhere else. Qumran, a desolate plateau on the shores of the Dead Sea, the Essenes built a society based on complete collectivism. Here, against a backdrop of stark, sun-beaten cliffs, they established a settlement that was part monastery, part fortress of faith. There was no private property. Upon joining, new members would surrender all their possessions to the community, which were then shared among all. Everyone followed strict schedules that structured their days from sunrise to sunset, with designated times for prayer, work, study, and communal meals. These meals were not merely for sustenance. They were sacred rituals. Purification was central to their existence. They practiced daily ritual immersions in specially built pools called mikvehs, cleansing themselves physically and spiritually. Every aspect of daily life, from what they ate to how they spoke, was governed by meticulously detailed written rules, ensuring that the entire community moved as one unified, sanctified body. The Essenes believed that spiritual purity was achieved through strict, unwavering discipline. Their community was governed by a set of detailed codes that regulated nearly every facet of life. These rules, known as the community rule, were not suggestions, they were the law. They dictated proper behavior, speech, clothing, and social interaction. For example, interrupting another member during a community meeting, laughing too loudly, or even spitting in the assembly could result in penalties. Any deviation was addressed through internal sanctions, which ranged from reduced food rations to temporary exclusion from the community's sacred meals. In more serious cases, a member could be expelled entirely. Yet, this system wasn't about punishment for its own sake. It was about creating a perfectly ordered society, a living embodiment of their sacred texts, where every action was aligned with divine will, all within a communal framework designed to forge a path to holiness. Then, in the mid-20th century, a chance discovery by a young Bedouin shepherd forever changed the study of ancient scriptures and brought the world of the Essenes into the light. Hidden in a series of caves near Qumran for nearly 2,000 years were hundreds of manuscripts preserved by the dry desert air. These became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among them were the oldest known copies of books from the Hebrew Bible, texts that predate other known versions by 1,000 years. But there was more. The scrolls also contained writings never seen before, detailed rules of the Essene community, hymns, prayers, and prophetic texts that spoke of a final cosmic war. These scrolls revealed significant variations from the standard biblical text's alternative, interpretations in a deeply apocalyptic theology that had been lost to history, offering an unprecedented window into a vibrant and diverse form of Judaism that existed before the rise of Christianity and modern rabbinic Judaism. The Essenes believed they were living in the final days of a corrupted age, on the very cusp of a divine judgment. Their theology was intensely dualistic. They spoke of two paths, the way of light and the way of darkness. Humanity was divided between the sons of light, who were the Essenes themselves, and the sons of darkness, which included everyone else. They awaited redemptive figures, including a priestly Messiah and a kingly Messiah, who would lead them in a great apocalyptic battle. One of their most famous scrolls, the War Scroll, describes this final conflict in vivid detail, where the forces of good, led by the Archangel Michael, would ultimately triumph over the forces of evil. Their worldview was one of imminent transformation, a purification of the world that would vindicate their retreat into the desert and their unwavering faith. When scholars began to study the Dead Sea Scrolls, many noted striking similarities between the teachings of the Essenes and the earliest followers of Jesus. Concepts like symbolic immersion for spiritual cleansing, similar to baptism, were central to both groups. Communal living, the sharing of property, and the emphasis on righteousness and purity echo through the Gospels and the Essene texts. Furthermore, the messianic expectation found in the Qumran scrolls, with the awaited arrival of a teacher of righteousness, raises deep questions. Was John the Baptist influenced by, or even a member of the Essene community? Did Jesus' teachings draw from this same well of spiritual thought that was flourishing in the Judean wilderness? These parallels have sparked decades of debate about direct influence, shared cultural ideas, or perhaps a parallel development, as different groups sought renewal in a time of crisis. So, why did a community so organized and dedicated simply disappear? The most widely accepted theory points to the First Jewish-Roman War, which raged from 66 to 73 AD. Historical evidence suggests the Roman army marched through the Jordan Valley and likely destroyed the settlement at Qumran around 68 AD, the Essenes. Being pacifists who had prepared for a spiritual war, not a physical one, would have been no match for the Roman legions. It's believed that as the threat grew, they carefully hid their precious library of scrolls in the nearby caves, hoping to one day return and retrieve them. At some point, the Essenes ceased to exist as an organized community. Their texts were hidden, their settlements were abandoned. Their legacy fell silent for nearly 2 millennia, a forgotten chapter of history buried beneath the desert sands. But their ideas, so carefully preserved on parchment and papyrus, endured through the centuries, waiting to be rediscovered. The Essenes remind us that history is not shaped only by those in power, by kings and conquerors. Sometimes the greatest secrets, the most profound ideas, are preserved by those who chose silence and retreat. They were a people who turned their backs on the world in order to save what they believed was its sacred heart. Their writings continue to challenge traditions, inviting us to reinterpret sacred texts and to see the ancient world not as a monolith, but as a vibrant landscape of diverse beliefs. They expand our understanding of faith, power, and the timeless human search for meaning and spirituality. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was more than an archaeological find. It was the recovery of a lost voice, a voice that still speaks to us today from across the millennia. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like the video, share it with others interested in history and spirituality, and subscribe to our channel to keep exploring humanity's greatest mysteries. Thank you for watching.